Welcome, everyone. A couple of housekeeping things that Brian already shared with you a few moments ago, but the Q&A for questions, the chat, make sure you share with everyone. If the closed captioning is helpful, you can enable that on your end, and make sure that that's an option for you if that's something that would be helpful. Good morning on the West Coast, most of the country. Good afternoon on the East Coast. I heard in the opening that we have somebody from Philippines. I think it's either really late in the evening or super early in the morning for the Philippines at this point. But greetings to you from wherever you are for this session. So I have a Menti code up there, and I'm going to come off of my slides and go to my actual Menti. But if you want to scan that QR code, or you can use the code the code number in Menti, 76930490. And I'm going to come off and actually put my Menti on the screen so that you can see it. And we're going to start with this question. So again, there is the QR code or the numerical code number in menti.com. How long have you been a teacher? Pop that in if you have a chance, and we should begin to see some responses as you respond to that code. And there we go. We've got 25, 26, 27. Somebody just year 2,
And you guys don't worry
37.
when you're typing in. If you don't see something, don't worry. Just hit submit, because on my phone at least, it's like white text on a white background. So if that happens to you, just type it in and hit submit, and you'll see it up here, even if you don't see it on your phone screen.
So lots of responses, lots of people with lots of experience, down to folks that have just barely gotten started in their teaching careers. Let me go to the next one. And that is this question, just quickly: grade levels and or subjects you teach. Oh, I'm sure we have some elementary folks and also some middle and high school folks. 4th grade, 4th, 3rd, 8th grade US, 6 to 8, 8th grade social studies. Oh, sorry about that. And then this one is an important one for me. On a 0 to 5 scale, how comfortable are you with TCI? A 0 is you might have just heard TCI uttered in the last 5 minutes. A 5 is 4 or 5 is you've been using TCI's materials for a long time. You're super comfortable. You completely are good with TCI. And we've got a range. I don't see any zeros. That's a good sign. That's good news. So we've got a range of folks in terms of your experience and background level, and some experts. So that's awesome. Let me come back to my slides. I appreciate that input from y'all very, very much. Let me give you just a little tiny bit of background about me. I went to college and grad school. I taught for almost 40 years. I retired in the spring of 2020, 10 weeks into the pandemic, not because of the pandemic, but it turned out that my timing wasn't terrible. Those of you still in the classroom, those 2 years, 3 years when the pandemic was going strong were really challenging. Thanks for what you're doing and continue to be doing in classrooms, but that was a tough couple of years. In terms of TCI, like Natasha, I came into TCI quite a while back in the binder days. I'm one of those binder people. In 1993, I made the move from middle school to high school, and they had a set of binders in my department, and I fell in love with TCI and with what it could do in my classroom, and then came aboard. And on the side, I began doing some teacher training, some curriculum development, some trying out of new programs. I was a pilot teacher for government and economics and U.S. history. So I've been involved with TCI for a long time, and still involved and still loving having an opportunity to work with teachers and school districts around the state, around the country. So today, what we're going to cover in this session, we're going to go about 45 minutes altogether. A little bit of TCI story, some of which you got from Bert and Brian, but we're going to dip into and explore and talk about and then experience elements of the 6 strategies, the 6 teaching strategies that undergird every TCI lesson, K through 12, for social studies. And elements are present in science, but especially in social studies. It's sort of the heartbeat of TCI are these strategies. And we're going to talk about them and kind of what they look like and how you'll be able to use them in your classrooms. So TCI, Bert mentioned, founded back in the late 1980s, 1989. Classroom teachers, curriculum specialists, and the focus is making a difference in the lives of teachers and their students, and with the best possible approach to instruction, social studies, and K-8 science that's going to be engaging and interesting and fun for you and for students. TCI is based on theory and research, and it's based on the concept of active instruction. These are the 6 strategies you see on the screen, the orange bars. We're going to dip into each of those for just a little bit this morning and talk about what those strategies look like and how they play out in your classrooms. Those are the strategies that undergird every lesson, but those strategies come from the idea of high quality social studies instruction. You see the bullet points on your screen. I'm not going to read through them, but alignment, practice and skill based, multiple points of view, well organized, scaffolding, and then formative and summative assessments that you can add to the mix to make sure that your students are making progress. I think that this particular piece is significant. That QR code on your screen, and also Natasha put a link to this in the resources earlier this morning before we got started. And you can find a document with, if you go to the QR code or if you go to the resources folder, you'll find a document that describes briefly in a paragraph these key educational theorists and what they've brought to the table. And TCI has taken those theories, taken that research, and made it a part of what TCI is all about. So understanding by design, Wiggins and McTighe, the idea of backwards design, where you're trying to go, and plan how you're going to get there by going backwards from your finish point. Robert Marzano, non-linguistic representation, graphic organizers is one of his key contributions. Howard Gardner, multimodal learning, what was used to once be called multiple intelligences. He started with 7, went to 8. I think there have been a couple of tweaks and there are more. We don't all learn the same way, and we're not just the kind of the primary verbal linguistic or logical mathematical. There's a broader range of ways that people make sense and learn about things around them. Elizabeth Cohen, cooperative interaction, that as students learn to cooperate, that can be a powerful way for them to increase what they learn and how well they retain it. And then Jerome Bruner, the idea of the spiral curriculum. All students can learn. If we start together toward the bottom of the spiral with questions that all students understand the question and can respond to it, and then we can come up the spiral together with a series of sequence questions to get them there. That is the anchor, if you will, of the TCI approach. And that approach is the scaffolding, the skeleton, for lack of a better term, for the strategies that we're going to look at this morning. Again, if you do the QR code, you'll get a copy of that document. You see some sample PDFs of the pages there on your screen. Might be helpful for you, and feel free to make use of that in the best way that makes sense for you. So the strategies, we're going to start off with visual discovery. So visual discovery, the idea is that powerful images can help students connect to content, and you can pull content from those images. And so the strategy basically is setting up the images, choosing the images. TCI and its programs, when visual discovery is a lesson strategy, those images will be in your program, and you'll see them. You'll be able to project them on your when you see a visual discovery lesson in TCI, you almost inevitably will see the first question be, what do you see? And students can answer that question. Everyone can answer that question. And then eventually we'll challenge students to apply what they learn. So here's an example. This is an image from an 8th grade lesson. The focus of the lesson is manifest destiny. And so in the chat, if you would just take a moment, think like an 8th grader. You're not 8th graders, of course, you're professionals, but because you're professionals, you're capable of kind of putting on your 8th grade hat. Go to the chat, and if you were an 8th grader, if you were thinking like an 8th grader, how would they respond to that question? What do you see? And I'm going to give you a moment to do that. the floating lady, the angels, cranes, buffaloes, settlers. They're a little bit covered at the bottom of the screen, but settlers. And then next, I'm going to move up that chain just a little bit. Um, what direction is the movement of the slide? What direction do things appear to be moving? And they're moving to the left, from the right to the left. And if you put that flat on a table and put a map on it, that would be to the west. We're moving to the west. And then we can ask, how do those settlers, again, they're a little bit obscured, but how do those settlers, how do they seem to be feeling about this? A little hard to tell, but I'm going to suggest those settlers are feeling relatively confident. They've got their tools, they've got their horse. But how about the Native Americans? How do they appear to be feeling about this? They're looking over their shoulders. They're a little more concerned, a little worried, perhaps, for the Native Americans. And how about that herd of buffalo? The buffalo are like getting out of Dodge. They are on the run, trying to escape the effects of those settlers coming their way. So this is an image that you can use and spiral that up to help kids begin to get a sense of what was Manifest Destiny all about. What was that particular chunk of mid 1800s, early to mid to later 1800s, that westward movement? What was it all about, and how did it affect different people groups and other groups? So that's a quick example of visual discovery. Take powerful images, put them on the screen, have kids interact. And one of the ways that you can interact with these too, I just did this at the California Coaches Camp in the last couple of days, is you can ask students to step into the slide. So I asked teachers a couple of days ago, one teacher played the role of a settler, one teacher played the role of a Native American, and one teacher played the role of a buffalo. And I told them on the count of three, you're going to freeze, and then I'm going to tap you on the shoulder, and I'm going to ask you some questions. So I tapped the settler on the shoulder and asked, what's going on? And they explained it. How are you feeling? Etc. And then I refroze them, and I went and did the same for the Native Americans and the buffalo. A way for students to engage with that image and pull that content out, pull the concepts out of that image. That's strategy number one, visual discovery. Woo, that was a lot. Here's strategy number two. And this is my all-time favorite. In 1993, when I came to the high school level, I had been trying to create my own TCI-like activities. I didn't know what TCI was. The middle school where I came from in Salinas did not have access to TCI's materials. TCI was still pretty much brand new. But in 1993, I came to a high school level in the Sacramento area, and they had the big binders. And I'm leafing through the binders, and I found these incredibly cool experiential exercises. This particular strategy for me was the one I loved. I had tried to create some of my own. They were a little clunky. It turns out that it takes a lot of time to develop curriculum. And when you're also teaching, oh my gosh, that's two full-time jobs. So I looked for examples from other publishers. Some of you perhaps have been teaching long enough, you're familiar with Interact, and Interact does some great simulations, but they're super long. They're designed to last 2 or 3 weeks, and I didn't have that kind of time. And then I found TCI experiential exercises that were designed to last for a period or part of a period, and they were phenomenal. So that's what I fell in love with. These are the activities, the kinds of things where students, they come across you in the grocery store after they're out of your classroom the next year, a couple of years later, and they come up to me and they, first of all, they're shocked that you actually buy groceries and eat. What a concept. Teachers are human. But then they say, hey, Gruba, are you still doing that activity, the dot game? Are you still doing that activity where we recreated World War I trench warfare, or whatever the activity was, because they're super memorable. So the idea of experiential exercise, we're going to do short, memorable activities that help make events, ideas, concepts meaningful. We're going to make it as authentic as we can, and then we're going to conduct a debrief. And we're going to make sure that students connect the content and the concepts to the activity. So it's not just a fun thing they did in class, but it helps them understand the historical concept, the political concept, whatever it is that they were digging into. So Experiential exercise. And here's one example. So this is a shot of a photograph of a high school activity about immigration and the number of people that were coming to the United States through Ellis Island in New York and Angel Island in California, and the process they had to go through. And so in this activity, one student plays the role of an immigration inspector, and other students are playing the role of immigrants. And they're getting a medical check, they're getting other kinds of checks, and they go through this experience of being immigrants and the process that they have to go through. And then we link that back to the actual immigration story that was going on back in the 19th century. A fun activity for students, also a little daunting for them because things, they're not actually, and the student who's playing the part of the inspector doesn't, just so you know, they don't actually place their pen inside the mouth of the student. That's clearly instructed to them. So they get to experience that. I mentioned the dot game a moment ago. The dot game, you pass out pieces of paper. Only a few students have a dot, and they try to become infiltrators into groups. And it's to mimic what was going on in the Red Scare, the 1950s, and the suspicion of the Red Scare and communism, etc. So have students reenact experience history, experience government, and then connect it to the concepts and the content. That's strategy number 2, experiential exercise. It comes from lesson number 11 in the high school pursuing American ideals. The dot game. Oh, thank you for sharing that. The dot game is also it's the exact same game for 5th grade for the Salem witch trial. Are you a witch? You look like a witch. I think you might be a witch. It's a great game to kind of raise the suspicions, whether you're trying to track down witches or communists. It works super well in the classroom. It's one of my favorites. That was number 2. Number 3, the social studies skill builder. This strategy usually pairs students, and that pair of students are going to use multiple kinds of modalities, are going to dig into, usually on a placard or some kind of a little mini poster. We call them placards, picture cards at the elementary school level. And they're going to rotate and visit stations on the wall, or perhaps you have a pile, a resource pile in a spot in your classroom. And when they're done with a placard, with a picture card, they're going to walk up and return the one they were using and then grab a new one and go back with their partner. But they're going to engage and dig into usually primary source images and primary source text, one or the other or both. And they're going to then respond to that. And in their interactive student notebooks or the prompts that you've given them, they're going to respond and answer some questions based on the content that they're looking at. And they're going to repeat that task. They're going to visit multiple stations, 8 stations, 6 stations. And they're going to repeat the same task, but with different content each time. So they're going to get a chance to practice the skill over and over again. They're going to get some feedback from you. And then there's going to be a debrief where we're going to make sure that students all were able to access that information and that content. Social studies skill builder, 2 students, usually, typically standing up, moving around in a fairly quick pace, but then digging in to pull the content from the primary sources on those various stations. An example, this is a 6th grade lesson. It's lesson number 6. I believe it's ancient Sumer. And what the students are doing is that they're trying to analyze what, by looking at artifacts and some text about Sumer, they're trying to answer the question and determine what makes a civilization. And they're going to visit and take a look at various elements of Sumer civilization and what made it such. And it's a great technique. And as someone has mentioned that, I'm going to check. That's, oh, thank you, Natasha. Natasha said you can use this in so many different ways, design them on your own. Lots of great lessons, of course, in TCI's content that'll allow you to let kids visit the stations, a station at a time, pull that content out, engage with their colleague, with their peer, and really dig into what it is that you're teaching in a way in which they're doing the exploration. They're able to exercise those social studies skills. So they're getting that practice over and over again, but they're also getting the content that comes with that practice. So that is strategy number 3. We're halfway home before we're going to practice one and see one ourselves.
Hey, Carl, I just want
This
to
one
add
is the response. Please go
I
ahead,
just want to
Natasha.
add
Thank
on
you.
yeah, those skill builders. One of the key things too is the immediate feedback that students get because they're coming back and they're checking in with the teacher after they've finished each of the different stations. And so being able to give the kids that immediate, like, inactivity feedback and coaching, I think is one of the most powerful things here. And I think it's part of what makes it feel like kind of game like for the kids. It's like, hey, they want to go and get checked off, move on to the next one, and try to get through each of these. So just a great way to break down an activity and ensure that kids are on track with the content.
And a teacher tip that I actually got from my cousin, who was an elementary school teacher in Texas, my cousin Christy, she used to do these social skill builders. And when students would come to get their check, she had a stamp and she could give a quick glance at what the students had done and she would put a little stamp on it. And then her trick was if they were right on the ball, the stamp looked just right. It was perfectly aligned. If she saw that they had done the task, but it wasn't quite, they didn't quite get it, she would turn the stamp sideways. So that then, if she was glancing at it later, she could very quickly see, oh, all these stamps for these 6 prompts or however many there were, all these stamps are just all lined up. And that made her assessment of this process much more effective and much faster for her. So turn the stamp sideways or turn the stamp upside down if the students need to dig in a little bit more. And then what she would do before she would actually offer her final assessment, she would have her students look at their interactive student notebook and she would tell them, if your stamps are all straight up and down, you're the expert and you're going to help other students whose stamps aren't straight up and down so that all of us end up with straight up and down stamps. And it helped with the assessment. It helped students get to be able to be peer teachers to one another. And it was kind of a great technique. And so I stole that and I used it with high school kids. It worked with high school kids. It worked with elementary school kids. So feel free to grab that one and steal it if you're so inclined. Okay, let's go on to, I think we're on strategy number 4. So strategy number 4, this is designed to try and increase the number of kids who participate in discussions. And at the high school level, I want to tell you that I used to be a fantastic discussion leader director, but my big problem for a long time was that discussion was happening with me and 2 or 3 students out of 35. They were the kids that were going, oh, me. And we had great discussions, but a huge percentage of the other kids were not involved. The response group strategy is designed to get all kids, more kids, all kids involved in discussions. And that's why I loved this strategy. It was one of my favorites. The idea is that we're going to discuss, we're going to take on complex, challenging topics. But we're going to group students almost always in groups of 3. And so there will be at least 3 prompts, 3 key discussion points, and the responsibility of the group will be taken by a different student for each of those 3 questions. And I think the key element that helped increase the quality of discussions is that they got a chance to dig into, explore some of the responses for that prompt before they would then stand up and have a chance to respond. So we're going to challenge them with questions. We're going to give them a chance to prepare responses. And then one representative per group is going to lead the discussion. And I apologize, my landline has decided it was going to ring. I still have one of those. You can tell how old I am by the fact I have a landline. It was for me a phenomenal strategy to get more kids involved. So now if I did a full-on response group, every kid was responsible eventually for, they were going to be sharing. It was their responsibility to share, and then they would pass it on to the next. And we taught them about how do you politely pass on that leadership role to another group. It was excellent. So it starts as small and preparation, and then the teacher asks one student from one group to share their response, and then that student chooses the next student from another group, and it bounces around the room until every group has had a chance to participate. That's the concept behind response group. Then we go to the next question with a new responder in each of those groups. So a full-on response group, after they talk in their small group, prepare, think through, then they're the spokesperson for their group. The
Carl,
next question.
that question came up in chat about, just clarifying, it starts in the small group, then moves to the large group. And I will just, add, I know you guys have all seen students like this. I have two of my own kids. One of them is the type that would just sit there and talk with Carl all day in class, constantly raise her hand, want to talk. The other one will not talk at all, when it's, raise your hand in class. But you put him in a small group and he really takes leadership. He starts talking. So the idea is we're trying to, make sure we're reaching both of those types of students. That student who's a little more reticent to share in the big group, they can really talk in that small group. And hopefully after like kind of working in that, that smaller setting, they're going to feel more comfortable than being that one that's a presenter, maybe one time as we move around to the different groups. So, just these strategies, they're designed to reach and engage all learners. So that perfect example of being able to give a kid that's more reticent to speak out in class a chance to work in a smaller group.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. That's great. So here's an example. This is a high school U.S. history example. The students are talking about different points of view about the progressive era, and they're preparing, and they actually have a mask that they put on a little popsicle stick because they take on the role of historical figures that were relevant in the progressive era. So Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, and others. They have information to prepare. And then the questions are, how was progressivism's approach successful, and how does an income tax make sense? Should we have child labor laws that prevent children from working, etc.? So the idea is that students are not only discussing, but in this example, they're discussing as if they were some of these historic characters. And so each of the prompts, each of the questions they discuss in their group, and then one student takes the role of being, for that round, one student in the Teddy Roosevelt group holds up the Teddy Roosevelt mask and responds as if they were Teddy. Another group representing Woodrow Wilson, they respond as if they were Woodrow Wilson. So it's another kind of an interesting tweak on the response group. In this case, they weren't responding necessarily with their own perspective and opinion. They were responding with the perspective and opinion of a particular historical figure that they had dug into a little bit during their preparation time. So that's the response group, a great way to get more students talking, more students involved in discussions in your classroom. That was number 4. Here comes number 5. I'm going to ask a poll question. I'm going to let you respond in the chat. And here's the poll question. It's a yes or no. Do you think that teaching writing is important in social studies classrooms? Yes or no in the chat. Nobody said no yet. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, it's important. I can tell you that the further you go up toward high school, the more the teachers will tend to try to divert writing to English teachers. So sometimes I've had high school teachers make the argument that no, it's not important. They're doing that in English. And I'm going to respectfully, if that's your position, I didn't see any of those, but if that's your position, I'm going to respectfully disagree, because the kind of writing that happens in social studies and in science really is the kind of writing that we want to have kids do more and more of. It's going to make them more competent as writers. The problem is that if you assign writing, you have to figure out how to assess it. And that takes time. And I don't know about anybody else, but in my career, I will admit to having done this, a couple of times. I assigned something in writing. I wanted students to write. They produced what I asked them to produce. I collected it. I needed to assess it. I took it home in my backpack. I got home. I put it back in my backpack and I brought it back to school. and I didn't look at it. But the next day I took it home and then I brought it back. And and eventually, I'm only going to admit to this a couple times, and hopefully there are no former colleagues of mine in the room or administrators, but a couple times it just never got assessed because assessing takes so much time and energy. I can't solve that problem, but what this strategy but what this strategy does is makes your assessment easier because the writing is going to be better. So the concept is we're going to front load some kind of an experience in which students are going to have almost an experiential exercise. Then they're going to have some pre-writing to record ideas, thoughts, and feelings. And then the key for this one is number 3, we're going to give them authentic writing assignments. One of the reasons that writing and assessing student writing is so challenging and hard to do is because it's often not very engaging for you as the teacher. And I'm going to argue that that's at least in part because of the 5-paragraph essay, which is a tool that gets overused and isn't super. What are you going to write about? What are 3 supporting paragraphs to support your position? What did you write about? And kind of repeat and give us a summary. Not a terrible approach, especially for younger writers to begin to get the concept of narrative style writing, but not super engaging. Instead, we're going to give more authentic writing assignments, and we're going to help guide students through that process so that when you do have to assess, at least you'll be assessing more interesting, engaging writing than the classic 5-paragraph essay. Here's an example. This is pieces of writing that students did in a teacher's classroom in which they went through an experience where they were World War I soldiers experiencing trench warfare. And that experience was set up in the classroom with students seated on the floor, the chairs moved out of the way so that a long line of kids could be facing one another. And then the teacher flashed the lights on and off to mimic explosions from a distance away, read some examples from World War I era poetry, World War I era diaries, told some of the stories of what happened to soldiers who were engaged in trench warfare in World War I. That was all an experience. And then they came out of that experience and they were assigned the task of writing a letter back home describing what it was like to be a World War I trench warfare soldier. And then some of them, printed it up and made the paper look old, etc. And they had lots of fun with that. As compared to write a 5-paragraph essay about what life was like for World War I trench warfare soldiers. The letter home, or a more standard traditional kind of approach, I would rather read the letter home, especially as I've coached them up about you're going to make sure you give some kind of a salutation at the beginning and some kind of a greeting, some kind of a farewell at the end of the letter. Feel free to, it's fictional. Feel free to talk about the family members to whom you're writing. Make it creative in any way that works for you to make that writing more engaging for students, and it's going to be more engaging for you as the teacher doing some assessment. That was number 5, I think. This is number 6. Our last strategy is problem-solving group work, and those on the middle school and high school level in our session will perhaps agree with me that especially as students middle and high school, as they get group assignments, they begin to be frustrated with them. Lots of students, either because they feel like people are riding on their coattails and not doing their fair share, or they're not given a chance to engage because students are taken over and not letting everybody be involved. And so this strategy is designed to share the load of group assignments, challenge students with multiple ability projects where different elements have to happen. Artistic efforts, writing efforts, creative kinds of efforts, prepare students for success, and give out clearly defined roles that everyone needs to participate in and play their part to be able to get the group to be successful, and then give them a chance to work on their project, autonomy and time, and then have them present. They present their skit, they present their poster, they present what it is that they have produced as part of the task for the problem solving group work. Collaboration with clear guidelines, etc. And here's an example. This is from 7th grade, Life in Medieval Towns. Students eventually create a skit in which they present to their peers elements of life in a medieval town, a medieval village. It's a great activity that allows students to dig in, try things out, explore, and then present and talk about how that works and what that looks like. That is strategy number 6. So we're going to go live. I'm going to come off of my slides just momentarily. I'm
And
going to go to
Carl,
my, yes.
while you're doing that, I just want to hit on something that's lighting up the chat. So when we're talking about grading with writing, how challenging it is, a lot of people are chiming in with different ways they are using AI for grading. So obviously proceed with caution, like making sure that it's working the way you want it to, that it really is meeting those expectations. But clearly something that's kind of working as a shortcut for people to be able to get some initial feedback that they can then put onto their papers or into the TCI grading platform to share with students. And someone made the point, I think it's really important, like making sure you put what are your expectations in there. And in the Writing for Understanding activities, TCI will give you a rubric that lists out exactly what we want kids to be doing. So you have those clear guidelines of what you're looking for in the final product.
I will add that I think there's a tendency among folks in the AI chat GPT discussion to either be all in or all out. And I think, like most things, probably the answer is somewhere in the middle. My experience, and I haven't used AI and ChatGPT a ton, but a little bit, and in a classroom context, actually with college students, one of the takeaways of watching students use it and how they used it was you really do have to, if you're going to use it, you do have to be careful the way you set up your parameters, because it the old classic phrase of garbage in, garbage out is very much true in terms of how that rolls with ChatGPT and AI. If you don't structure your parameters to get what it is, to get the kind of result that you want, it can go south. It can kind of go sideways. So I'm not the old guy that says never, never, but I'm also not the person that says it's all wonderful and you don't have to do anything to prepare for it. I think the right answer is somewhere in the middle. We don't have a ton of time. I've only got just a few minutes to show you an example of one of the strategies in action. So I'm pulling it from a high school program. This is from the Government Alive program, senior government course, Power, Politics, and You. And I'm in the opening teacher overview, teacher page, the teacher landing page. For those of you who have an account, you know what this looks like. If you haven't gotten an account or haven't had a chance to explore it, every account, every grade level essentially looks almost identical in terms of what it looks like for you as the teacher. Over on the left-hand navigation purple bar, you'll see the lesson overview. And then I can click this little spot and I can show you that in government, a semester high school course, there are 18 lessons plus a section on civic resources. I'm clicked into lesson number 4. And so this activity, which is one of the strategies, is built into lesson number 4. And the magic of TCI, that you may hear this in other places today, but the magic of TCI, for those of you who haven't used it a ton, the magic of TCI is in the activity. And every activity is built on the skeleton of one of these 6 strategies. So if you are engaging with TCI and you want kids to engage in that active, interesting, fun kind of learning, it happens in the activity slideshow, which I'm circling on my screen. You click the slideshow, but I'm going to go to my next slide because I have loaded the slideshow. We're not going to look at the preview, but just a little bit of context. These are high school seniors who are taking a look at the Constitution, and the preview is they get a little bit of a look at the Constitution and the basic structure of it. The three branches of government, the distribution of power, checks and balances. That's the preview, and it leads to an activity, and the activity is essentially a social studies skill builder. So I just want to show you a few elements from this lesson before we allow you to head off to your next session here in just a few minutes.
And
In this
Carl,
social studies skill builder, please
I
go
just
ahead,
want to make,
Natasha.
yeah, sorry, I just want to point out because this question came up in chat. How can I tell which of the teaching strategies is being used in the program? And right on this slide, when you click on activity is the one of the spots, you can see it. You can see it says activity colon social studies skill builder. So the idea is that
Oh,
as you're getting more familiar with these strategies, you recognize that, then you know, hey, I want to make sure that in the skill builder, I'm giving kids immediate feedback, right? And so you're taking those elements that we showed you today and applying it whenever you see that strategy in use. And Carl's going to show you another place here on the procedures where you can
yeah.
see the strategies marked as well.
This is the place for me that's the easiest place to find it. And if you click on the procedures in your teacher planning, that orange box is your teacher planning box. Students don't see that. But if you click on procedures and then click see more, and we come down, you see there's always a preview. We're not, our session is not about the lesson structure of TCI, but TCI's lesson structure is consistent. Every lesson starts with a preview, try and tap into and connect to prior knowledge, and then the activity. And then right below the activity, you can see where I'm circling it on the screen. The activity in this particular lesson is a social studies skill builder. That's the strategy. So that's the way that I see it and find it quickly. And in this case, again, we're going to do this quickly just so you can get a little bit of an appreciation. It's a social studies skill builder. It's labeled right there in this portion of the activity slideshow. And what students do in this activity is that they become law school students. They are studying for the bar exam. They do a bit of background. Again, they've done a bit of background reading and some basic structure of the Constitution, the way the Constitution is amended, and then we go to a challenge. And in the challenge, they'll be working with a partner, and they're going to get a question that you have cut and prepared and put in an envelope. They're going to pull that question out. So they don't visit a placard on this one. On this one, they pull questions from an envelope, and then they use a little bit of background reading that they've done, as well as the Constitution itself, to try to respond to the questions. So they're going to have 2 or 3 handouts. I'm going to click and show you. These are the kind of questions that they'll be dealing with their pair. And I'll just click on it so it'll show it. It'll take me to a new screen. A little hard to see. See if I can blow that up a bit so you can see them. There's one question. Your uncle just celebrated his 30th birthday. Can he run for the House of Representatives? And they have to go into the Constitution and find out how old must you be to be a member of the House. And some of you don't know the answer because this is not your area of expertise. Others of you do because you teach it at the 8th grade level or you teach it at the high school level. But it turns out that the uncle can run for the House because how old do you have to be? You got to be 25. So they're going to answer a whole series of constitutional questions using these slips of paper that are the primary source questions that get them into the primary source document, the Constitution itself. They're going to go through that process. There's going to be a chance for them to review. They're going to compare it to a completed one with their partner, make changes as needed. This is how they're going to be checking for understanding and making sure that they've got correct answers. Once they've reviewed, we're going to discuss some questions. What do you notice about how the Constitution deals with power, distribution of power? Why did they choose it to be the way that they did? And then we're going to go into principles of the Constitution. Now we're going to go into year 2. They're going to respond to a different set of questions. And I'll just quickly show you what those look like. Now, instead of specific questions, now they go to a particular location in the Constitution, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1, and they have to decide what's the key principle in that chunk of the Constitution that they've taken a look at to understand what those principles are all about. They complete their matrix. They take their bar exam. Congratulations, they're lawyers. And in this last portion, they begin to explore some famous Supreme Court cases and what the responses were. And so they've got multiple opportunities to deal with actual Supreme Court cases. There's a transcript that gets read. I'll just share this, just a bit of it. There's a
In
transcript.
2001, the United States was in Afghanistan fighting against the Taliban in the war on terror.
And so they get background information about the case in text and in a verbal audio explanation of that case. So that's the activity. It's a type of a social studies skill builder because they are working together with a partner and they're using a primary source document and they're taking that and digging in to respond to those questions. I'm seeing the chat. I'm only seeing quick questions, but somebody's got a question about the long list of activities and directions for the activity slideshow. Let me go back to that. That's a helpful spot. So I am in to show that. Let me go back to what you would see when you first open up your page. So I'm going to go see less. And I don't have a ton of time, but I'm going to go fast. So in my lesson, I'm going to go to procedures. I'm going to click on procedures, and then I'm going to show see more. Always click to see more, and that's where you're going to get the lengthy description, the teacher's guide, if you will, of what you'll do throughout the course of this particular lesson and all of the elements of it.
Carl, there was
So
also a question about, can you see student responses from the classroom activity slideshows? And if you do assign the slideshow, so you actually push the slideshow out to the students, then their responses will show up for you to be able to grade. So depending on your situation, sometimes you may be kind of front of class and just presenting this to your students. But other situations or kids are doing things for homework, you'll want to assign that slideshow, and then you'll be able to see student responses when you're grading.
quickly, you'll see this again during the summit and your next couple of sessions, but other ways that you can make connections with TCI, get answers to questions. There's support along the way. There's professional development in your account. There's a what's new update as it comes along. There's a Facebook group for those of you that are in social media. Instagram has just been added. Somebody's asked a question about how much time. It varies depending on grade level, of course, but there's a pacing guide that you can find over on your navigation bar on the left-hand side that'll give you suggested amount of time for lessons. So I'm going to come off of the share and just say thank you for taking this time and working through these details. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to throw them in. I'll stick around here briefly. You're about to get released to head to your next session. That link is gone in the chat. That'll get you back to the lobby. But if you've got other questions, I'll stick around just for a couple minutes before I go back into the lobby. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you didn't feel like got answered before you head on to another session. So thank you from Northern California. Appreciate you and what you're doing and how you're making a difference for kids all over the country. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I want to say thank you again as well. So many great questions. And I put into chat that Facebook group because for those of you that want to keep talking, that's a great place. Kim and one of our TCI trainers is in there moderating the group. So really helpful. And we want to make sure you guys don't get lost. So I'm going to put the lobby link in here again. You'll see those sessions listed for period 2 there. And I'm going to leave you, Carl, because I'm off to my period 2 as well. All right. Take care.
Thanks, y'all. Thank you. And I'll stick around for a little bit if there are other questions that we didn't get to. But you're probably going to be heading pretty quick to another session. So thank you again.